President Trump and his conservative base are wasting no time seeking more bans for transgender athletes after the Supreme Court's ruling this week. The decision upheld bans in Idaho and West Virginia on transgender athletes playing on girls' and women's sports teams, further affirming policies in more than half the states in this country. And now conservative activists are pressing Democratic states without bans to do the same, with one leading legal group saying, quote, "You're next." Following the blow to the LGBTQ plus community, Human Rights Campaign President Kelly Robinson released a statement saying, quote, "No kid, not my kid, not your kid, not any kid deserves to be discriminated against." That should be a very popular opinion. Kelly Robinson joins us now at the table. Thank you so much for coming this morning on a holiday weekend. One of the things that when we talk about these kind of legal action to focus on trans people and specifically this focus on trans kids is I think it's important for people at home to remember that they are 1% or less than 1% of the population of this country, and the amount of resources and anger and vitriol that goes toward them as if they're this invading army that's going to take over the United States is disturbing. But what do you think is underneath that?
I mean, I think it's horrible. And we know at the end of the day, this is about power and control because trans people, especially trans kids, are not the reason gas prices are high.
Right.
Trans people are not the reason we are at war all across this world. And they're certainly not the reason that healthcare premiums are spiking. So if it's not that, what is it about? It's about sowing division and fear with a community that people just don't know much about. And I think the most important thing is exactly what you said. As these Supreme Court decisions come down, as these bad bills are being passed all across the country, the impact on our children, the idea that these kids don't know if they can feel loved, they don't know if they've got adults that have their back. That's why we have to keep showing up, because no kid, not any kid, should be made to feel that this country is not a place that they can live and belong.
Yeah. Speaking of power and control, the ACLU says this is as of June 26th. The ACLU is tracking 529 anti-LGBTQ bills in the United States. You have the map up so you can see where they are. Some are in blue states, some are in red states. But just what is the likelihood that even a fraction of these bills actually make it into law?
Well, you know, last year we beat nearly 90% of these bad bills. But what that means is that 10% still became law. 10% of these bills that continue to discriminate and criminalize the very existence of these folks. And then when you look at the cases more clearly, you can really see the harm. Like in this case at the Supreme Court, Becky Pepper Jackson, the plaintiff, she was the only trans girl that was playing in West Virginia. So you're telling me all these adults spend all this time, all the states spend all of this energy and resource going after one child's ability to play sports with her friends. We have to really focus on the impact that this is having on people and zoom back out to the bigger picture. We're better than this. And these bills don't just harm our trans kids. I think about the cisgender girls that are impacted because someone's now deciding if you're girl or woman enough. I think about our young boys that are getting messages about how they can treat people. That's not how we should be raising our young people.
You know, Kelly, something you said in your first answer caught my eye. This is a community that people don't know much about.
Right.
But the person with ostensibly the largest platform out of anyone in the world, Donald Trump, wants people to have this takeaway about transgender kids and athletes. Let's listen to him.
The fake news back there, they say, oh, that's a tight issue. But I don't like talking about it because I want them to continue on with that. I want them to continue on with they're in favor of the mutilization of your child for transgender purposes, the mutilization of your child. And I would say politically, it's a very good thing to run against a person that's in favor of that kind of stuff.
I'm wondering if for a moment you could describe the community and give us a fact check of what Donald Trump is saying, but then also address that last claim he made, that politically it's a good thing to run against the person that's in favor of that kind of stuff. Is he right about that?
Absolutely not. It is not a high bar for any elected official or politician to stand by the fact that every citizen in this country deserves the same civil rights and protections as everyone else. And, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Today, we might be talking about the trans community, but 50 years, we were talking about the black community. Before that, we were talking about women. The conversation about immigrants is on the table. As always, this is not new. Whenever there are big issues facing our country, some people try to make it seem like the smallest, the most marginalized of us are the problem, and we cannot stand for that. And especially with this community, a small community, less than 1% of this country, a community that right now is feeling like they have to go back into the closet and hide who they are, a community where nearly half of them are trying to leave their state or even the country just to find a place where they can be safe. They deserve better. We all deserve better.
One of the things that seems very clear to me, you talked about the other groups who have been attacked in the past. I'm thinking about how gay people were used, queer people were used maybe 30 years ago as a boogeyman in politics. Because voters, for some politicians, they feel like their voters need an enemy. And you guys are on the road, and I think you see your Let's Get Free national campaign. You want to reach like 74 million voters as we move forward. When you're out there talking to voters and you are explaining to them, you're trying to counter the bad things that they've heard about trans kids or non-binary kids, because you do have to, things are changing. Yes. And so sometimes you have to bring people into the conversation. When I came out, the way I put it to my family is like, look, the Eugene train's going to go. If you have questions, that's fine. We'll talk about it, right? I know I'm changing your mindset up a little bit, so I'm happy to keep talking about what this means for me and for all of us. So how do you do that in terms of voters and making sure they have the actual data so when they go to vote this year?
I actually think that the antidote to all this is telling the truth and showing the joy. Because at the end of the day, who would we want to be a part of America without queer and trans people?
Yes,
right?
Very boring.
Have the civil rights movement without Bayard Rustin, right?
Nope.
You wouldn't have Stonewall without Marsha P. Johnson. You would not have Beyonce without Uncle Johnny.
Very clear.
Who would want to be a part of that?
Google it.
So I think that part of what we have to do, and this campaign is all about, is showing the joy of our people. Because this opposition is fighting a future that's already arrived. Almost 30% of Generation Z identify as a member of our community. This year, we will be 1 in 10 of every voter. And in fact, by 2040, 20% of the electorate will identify as LGBTQ+. We have the numbers. We just have to translate that into the power not only to change laws and policies, but to change hearts and minds, too.
Yeah.
I was going to ask a question about how you keep the young generation hopeful and optimistic during a time of, I don't know, when it feels like they have a target on their back. But then just listening to you reminds me that when there are leaders like you out there using your platform and your work to, I don't know, bring cover to them, that's why they should be hopeful. So Kelly Robinson, president of the Human Rights Campaign, thank you, as always, for coming to The Weekend.